infrastructure. Question?
Yeah. It's kind of back to your research, but you were talking about the Birds of Prey National Conservation Area, and is that specifically where you do all of your research?
Yes.
Within that area?
Yes.
So what exactly is the legality surrounding that conservation area? Like, what makes it a conservation area, and like what exactly can happen on that land and what cannot happen?
It's super complicated because there were a lot of laws preceding the actual 1993 Congress setting aside that area. Basically, what it says is no right-of-ways can be made without. It's super complicated because there were a lot of laws preceding the actual 1993 Congress setting aside that area. Basically, what it says is no right-of-ways can be made without. It's super complicated because there were a lot of laws preceding the actual 1993 Congress setting aside that. Basically, what it says is no right-of-ways can be made. It's super complicated because there were a lot of laws preceding the actual 1993 Congress setting aside that. Basically, what it says is no right-of-ways can be made. It's super complicated because there are a lot of laws preceding the actual 1993 Congress setting aside nesting success. It's super complicated because there are a lot of laws preceding the actual 1993 Congress and there's a ton of it's super complicated because there are a lot of laws preceding the actual 1993 Congress and there's a ton of it's super complicated because there are a lot of laws preceding the actual 1993 Congress No, not yet. Sort of sticky subject. Working with BLM and CSCTC and everything. Sorry, orchard content. So we just need to work on it. No, that's actually Dr. Hansen is a really big groundswell guy, and he's looked at sort of impacts of diet. So, if cows eat the same thing ground squirrels do, does it impact them? But nothing's been published yet.
And then is there farmland on that
Yeah.
area?
Oh yeah.
Have people started looking into the impacts of like nitrogen runoff, eutrophication and stuff into that water on ground squirrels or raptors? Like, do people see them?
Not on ground squirrels. There's been some impacts on kestrels that have been done out of Boise State, but as far as I know, not for ground squirrels. Yeah.
For the Idaho Adopted Scientist program, what is kind of your main emphasis with the students? Do you get into these kind of issues? You talk about, the National Conservation Area as a standing charge to protect the raptors above all else. So other species are secondary. I mean, how much do you get into like policy type stuff that impacts the science?
Yeah.
Or are you mostly just focused on teaching them the scientific method?
Yeah, I try to keep it where we're teaching the scientific method and using the ground squirrels as an example. But I do try and keep it very big picture. So like again, really this whole introduction is pulled from the high school presentation I gave a couple weeks ago. And so I talked about fire and grazing and recreational shooting, just so that they have in their idea, not that one is wrong and one is good and, you know, that the raptors are the best thing on the planet, just that if you're thinking about a single species, you have to take into account all of these other factors. And the fact that this is an NCA is one big factor for why we would ever care about ground squirrels. And so I think that's kind of where I pose it, where you can't just look at something under a spotlight. You can't just singularly pick out a species that you like. Like, I want to study polar bears. Okay, cool. You also need to know about climate. You need to know about hydrology. You need to know about what they eat. You have to know all those things. And so I think it's more just about completing the picture for them about what a scientist does and all the things they have to consider. All right. Can you use all the time?
Yeah, it's good. This class goes till 6:50. That's the point. We want to have good discussion. So I think that we start working on the projects a little bit more. We're going to be doing them in some of those Tuesday discussion times, so you can start assessing out some ideas you all might have. I don't think I told you in advance. Maybe I emailed it to you, but we have a good mix of undergraduates, biology graduate students. We also have some public policy students, history students. So I think some of those maybe assessment questions or environmental policy things can also be incorporated into some of your lessons. So that may be kind of a new avenue that people
For sure.
skills, we can incorporate those as well. I think that was all I was going to say after your talk. So, let's see. I'm going to figure out how to do this. Let's talk it up. Oh, looks like it's ready. I have a map using these, yeah. So, for those of you that haven't been in 7th grade classrooms since you were in 7th grade yourselves, Micah Lauer is a teacher at 7th grade at Heritage Middle School. Has been there for 9 years and been teaching for 12 of that same age class. So he's had a lot of experience with middle school students. He did his graduate degree in Master's of Education at Washington State University, and then he has his undergraduate in Environmental Sciences from the University of Idaho. So he's teaching life sciences and is going to give us a little bit of an overview about what it's like to be in a 7th grade class, what his students are like, and sort of the teaching methods that he uses while he's there. So think about some questions you might have for him at the end of class, and with that, I'll turn it over. Thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, thanks. And in my undergrad, I did a lot of work. My upper division stuff was in environmental law, public policy, and then Masters of Public Administration, like the prerequisite stuff for that program, which I ended up not going into and going out working instead. So kind of dabbling in the natural sciences and then the social sciences, and then into this crazy thing called teaching middle schoolers. So does anyone in here have any contact or interaction with teenagers at all on a regular basis? Okay, so a few people understand how crazy it is. It's fun. What I want to get at a lot today is kind of talking about what teaching and learning means or could mean with middle schoolers, especially as we're thinking about how to meet the needs of those middle schoolers and planning activities for them in the classroom and out in the field. So a little bit of my philosophy, some of the change that's going on right now with science instruction that's really exciting, it's moving towards real applications of science, and then I'll talk specifically about how that translates into some of the things that we do in 7th grade life science that have to deal with the sagebrush step and our part of the world. So I've got a big question for you, and this is something I pose to my students, and this is something I pose to other teachers that I work with in professional development settings. And so I want to pose this to you and give you a minute or two just to jot a few things down. So what is the real work of science, and how do people learn to do that work? So take a minute and jot a few things down. What does that make you think? So it could be keywords or actions or tasks or courses that scientists take. Other ways you've learned about science maybe that weren't university or K-12. And then in just a minute, I'll invite you to just kind of turn and talk with someone next to you about some of the things you identified. maybe wrap up the last thought you're on, so you might not have time to write down every thought, but if you've collected a few thoughts, go ahead and just turn and chat with someone around you about some of the things that you identified or thought of.
So basically, like what you said, like making observations and hypothesis about the observation, and then running experiments and using data to disprove those hypotheses.
Yeah, it's so weird working with the kids. It's made me think about like what science is. Like, because it seemed so clear at first. Like, yeah, science, you like have data and analyze blah blah blah. Well, is science just like being curious?
Yeah, because like the higher you go, the more it blurs.
Yeah.
It seems like kind of like how you said, like the more you know, and the more you know that you don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's like some more questions.
Yeah, I think of it in the context of like, and I told them this, if I was like, science is not about like making big discoveries and like being the first one to do it. It's like, it's more about thinking critically. If I told you that eating hot pockets gives you brain cancer, would you just
Take about
believe me?
15 more seconds.
You're a scientist. Like, did I do any research? Or did I have a good sample size? Like, gotta think about things.
Yeah.
Just believe everything you hear. So I don't know.
Because there's a lot of stuff that you can read now, especially.
Oh yeah.
Okay, let's come back
To, like,
together.
determine, yeah.
Anybody want to share something that they came up with that they think is important that identifies the real work of science or what scientists do? Yeah, thanks.
The bottom line is I think we must strive to improve the quality of life for humanity.
Okay, great.
Interacting with your environment in a critical way.
Anyone else?
Making observations and coming up with a hypothesis about those observations, running experiments and using data to just prove the null hypothesis.
Okay. Anyone else?
We didn't get to those. When I saw your questions, it's like real work of science. This kind of goes back to what Zoe's doing. It's like we have to have this communication and education with the public so that we can use science to help influence policy and laws and all of that kind of stuff. And how do we make that connection between young kids who are 5-year-olds and like dinosaurs all the way up to policymakers and all that.
Did you have one as well?
Pretty close.
Hey, good connections.
I said it's the process of gaining knowledge and understanding in the world we live in, meaning organisms, interactions, etc., and then communicating that knowledge and understanding.
Okay. So I have one more question for you. Has anyone here any time, especially in like your K-12 situation, been in a science class where you felt like you were learning about science but not how to do science? Yeah, so
Absolutely.
immediately hands and nods. And so there's a real problem, I think, out there, and not in every classroom, but in a lot of classrooms. And there's something going on right now in science education that I think is helping address that. And those are the next generation science standards. And those are going in front of the Idaho legislature. And of course, being Idaho, we have renamed them the Idaho Science Standards. So there is no cry foul of whatever, like basically the State Department of Ed learned some lessons from the whole Common Core thing about, how you package these things, and different fonts or colors can sometimes appease people or make people not think that something's going on that's not going on. But what's interesting about these next generation standards is I think they're going to help us get at more in schools in a K-12 setting of what is the real work and how do we do that. So that science teachers are really compelled to think about, am I teaching students how to think with a scientific mindset? Am I teaching kids how to be scientists and do science versus teaching kids about stuff that has to do with science? And something that's really interesting and helpful with the next generation standards is they've got these 3 different things that are working together. So we have content, so things like photosynthesis or respiration or Newton's laws of motion, but those work together with the major concepts that kind of drive science, And then also with practices that scientists and engineers do, like modeling, collecting data, explaining, making arguments. So the idea is that the way kids will be assessed with these standards is through performance expectations. Like the student will be able to do, instead of kind of where we've been is the knowledge base. Like the student will know, so instead of just the student will know, the student will take that knowledge and do something with that knowledge. So craft an argument, create a model, pose a solution to a problem, answer a big question out there. So it's doing a lot of exciting stuff, and it's going to be doing a lot of exciting stuff here in the next few years all around the country, and especially here in Idaho. And as we think about a program like IdahoWatch, there are going to be a lot of educators who are going to be looking for opportunities to do real science and to do stuff to help students learn. And as I'm out working with teachers over the next few years, I will absolutely be promoting the idea of using the world around us in real science instead of contexts that are far away and can't be seen or touched and aren't part of our world. So let's talk about the crazy world of the teenage mind. And this is certainly not gender specific in any way, shape, or form. This could be any teenager, but just think to yourself for just a moment, what do you notice about the picture, and what does that tell you about teenagers, and maybe about the classroom environment in teenagers, and maybe some unique challenges? Yeah.
Well, the picture, and I have several nieces and nephews that are teenagers, and they always seem to have a million thoughts about a million things, like coming and going all at the same time. So it's hard for them to deal with all those thoughts and emotions that are sort of coming and going.
Yeah.
That's why I see in all your thought bubbles.
Yeah.
I mean, they're empty, but I assume there's something in there.
Sometimes I think they are partial or empty bubbles too. It depends on the kid. Yeah.
There's just like a lot of information coming off, and there's like thoughts, but there's no like vocalization of that information, like something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
I remember in a psychology class learning about the fact that teenagers are, like their brains are programmed to make them egocentric until they get a little bit older and then realize that not every single thing is like about them or happening to them. So I think to me the green arrows were saying like, everything is happening to you, this is all about you.
Boy, that research is absolutely true. Part of working with teenagers is teaching some of them of this, concept of others and empathy and things like that. And I'm being a bit snarky, but yes, they are really focused on my world and my immediate needs and the injustices affecting me and all of these other things. Of course, I think one of the keys and one of the reasons that I picked this photo is the thing in the hand. And so students, there's certainly all the things going on with teenagers that were going on when everyone in the room was a teenager, as far as social pressures and friends and things like that. But there's this incredibly quick way that information and stuff spreads through devices in the hallway, between class, during class, at lunch, before school, after school. And so they're getting fed like this incredible amount of information about their world. Useful, useless, all of the above, and then they've got a million responses and thoughts and things like that. And so one of the unique things I think that I've noticed increasingly is how can school compete? It really, in some ways, it's a competition for attention when they come in and they are focused on themselves a lot. And there's so many things going on hormonally and socially, and the thing that happened right before class, and Clemson deserved to win, not Alabama. And whatever it is, literally, or the things that come in and just tell you this spewing stream of consciousness, and you're like, whoa. And so just one example, and I'll share some examples of I think how school can compete and should really try to capture students' interest and not just assume because they are in your classroom they're a captive audience, because they're not. They might not walk out of the room, that they go and they turn on or turn off, and then the thing comes out in their pocket, and they're looking for any other way to be distracted. So going back to that previous picture, a couple of years ago, of course, every year more and more kids have devices and are walking around with devices, and sometimes they're walking around with the iPad and the iPhone on top of the iPad, and they've got, it's mind-boggling. And I surveyed my kids last year. And I said, okay, social media, you guys are on social media. What is your preferred social media channel? And by and large, it was Instagram. And we ranked, and I think it was first Instagram, and then it was Facebook, and then it was Twitter. But something like out of 165 students, I think there were 115 tallies that said Instagram's like the main way I communicate with people. And I thought, what happens if we play with science in Instagram? So I created this Sagebrush Step Instagram account. And actually last year when I came and talked, I was telling Kristen this today, I have like 62 followers, and I have almost 300 followers, which is not Kim Kardashian level. That is like a very small following. But the fact is a lot of those are students and former students. And some of those are biologists and scientists and people from different parts of the world. And so it was really a fun experiment to start playing around with this thing that can be seen as a distraction, can also be a tool. It can also help you learn and can engage you outside of the classroom and engage you in different ways. And to see the kids start to follow and to see what kids respond to or not respond to by liking or sharing or commenting. And so that's something to think about is again, there's all these distractions, there's all these things going on in the world, and sometimes it's a matter of how can I use that? Kids come in and they're just crazy. There's a million things going on. So that's a ton of energy. That can be a distraction, but if you can harness that energy and get them fired up about stuff, they will go endlessly if they have the right motivation and the right context for it. So we'll talk a little bit about leveraging interests and choices and just kind of how do you compete in this world where increasingly information, other things are out there that are vying for their interest all the time. And even if that phone's on silent, who's buzzing? What's the buzzing? Is it, can I look at it? Is it a text? Is it, so there's always this stuff that's competing. Yeah.
What is Instagram, and how do you meaningfully promote information about the sagebrush with it?
Hey, you bet. Instagram is like Facebook, but without Farmville and all the other games, and without like 1,500 posts about Donald Trump or whatever. It's image based. So you share images, you can post captions along with those images, and then you can hashtag them. So you could hashtag like, I have this love sagebrush hashtag that I started creating that other people are using now too, that no one else was using for anything. So people might hashtag like sports or NFL or whatever, and then you can see all the pictures and all the garbage as well. But what's interesting about this that I like to promote is that U.S. Fish and Wildlife uses this. Most national wildlife refuges have these. Public lands, BLM has one. So there's a lot of science organizations and science museums that are using this to engage audiences in different ways. So people love looking at images. Along with the images, they can get some information. If they like it, they can click follow, and then every time they open their Instagram, whatever you posted is in their feed, and so they're now getting some information. So it's like any social media that there's a ton of ways that people use it, and useful and useless, but it's really interesting to see how many more science-based organizations and agencies are using this as a way to connect with the public and engage people.
So I mean, we'll just post a picture of something and then a little explanation of what it is. Is that
whatever text you want to put along with it, and then people can like it, so you can see is this resonating with people? People can comment. And it's an app, but it's also Instagram.com, in this case /SagebrushStep, so you could actually look at it in a web browser without having an Instagram account. So it's accessible in a couple of different ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you going to use this for your students as far as like whether there's like classroom communication? Is that going to be more implemented?
I'm still playing around with this and figuring out exactly. Right now it's this stream, this extension of stuff we're talking about. Sometimes it's a sample of student work that I ask someone, hey, that's really cool. Can I take a picture of that? Cool. Or, oh, would you explain that? We'll make a little video clip. Great. Sometimes it's images from just around the West, so they can see and make connections with these places that they don't visit very often, especially the sagebrush. And we talk a lot about how students go camping in the mountains, and they love Stanley and places that are beautiful and pine trees, and then they drive through the sagebrush at 80 miles an hour on the way to a soccer tournament in Salt Lake. And so they don't get as many opportunities or contact points, I think, with this type of ecosystem as they do with a pine forest, for example. So yeah, I'm still playing around. I think there's a lot of potential with it and ways to have students interact with it. So it's still something I'm trying to figure out. And all these other science organizations are helpful in seeing the things that they do and how they engage audiences. So it's this kind of growing area.
Sorry, one more thing. I don't mean to keep interrupting you.
Oh, not at all.
I just looked out of the site here. I'm looking at it, and I'm seeing a lot of pictures that look pretty science-based. But I'm also seeing a lot of just like scenery.
Mhm.
So it looks like you're getting kind of all sorts of different people using it for all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, because I used to work in television, and they're always pushing social media. Always, we gotta have a Facebook story, and the whole purpose was to get hits. As many people as possible see your stuff, and it wasn't really necessarily meaningful conversation that people were writing. So that's one thing that I am concerned about with social media is that it's not always as meaningful because everyone has access to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of just you promoting something, Joe
Yeah.
Blow can post a picture of a sunset on the sagebrush.
And it is not necessarily a form of communication that promotes great depth or community, but it is, in a lot of ways, you're trying to reach a lot of people and you're trying to maybe give someone an opportunity to see and consider something in a new light. So I do post a lot of scenery, just like this is a really pretty place. There's some really cool stuff to look at, and maybe you've never, considered that or had an opportunity to be out there. So I would say, though, just in the nature of the platform and the interactions, that it's not a real depth experience, but it is that kind of, in some ways, superficial experience that then could lead, though, people to consider and contemplate, hey, does a place like that matter? What's out there? Should I think about this place or consider it?
I was just
Yeah.
gonna say the other night I thought I love Instagram because my son came in with an Instagram photo that he had seen and asked me questions about biology. I was like, he never asks me. I mean, I try and tell him stuff, and he's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
And then he came and he's like, Mom, is this really like what a raccoon would do? And blah blah blah. And I'm like, whoa, Instagram, like it got him to ask questions. It
Yeah.
got him to seek out further information, which was good.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of potential there and some things to be teased out, definitely. So along with this whole idea of school competing, I always appreciated this quote because it gets at, again, that you have this huge stream of information. So you're informing, but you are also in a way entertaining. And not to say that it should be a dog and pony show or a circus act or novelty, but entertaining by doing real stuff with a real purpose and giving kids real things to think about, and doing it in a way that matters in the real world and doing the real work of real scientists and helping kids understand that, this is not just something we're doing in class because we got 45 minutes to do, but this is something really important because it's the real work of scientists and we're going to use it to figure out some stuff about our world around us. This is another survey, so I love surveying kids and just collecting some data. And this was an open-ended survey, so I didn't give them any sort of like Likert scale or any boxes to check. I just said, hey, what works for you in science? What doesn't work for you? And not surprising, so this shows the wonderful opportunity in science, is that they love labs and experiments and hands-on. So these new standards especially are going to help teachers continue to think about how can I have kids do science, because that's how you learn science instead of just teaching kids about science and talking about it. Where I see some opportunities is the spilled beaker, writing, notes, research, reading. The funny thing is those came up even over tests and quizzes, which I expected tests and quizzes would be the number one thing that they didn't like. So I probed into that and asked them a little bit, and they're like, well, whenever you're writing, it's just like those questions you have to answer at the end of that 6-page section you were asked, and you turn it in and nothing's ever done with it, and it has no purpose, and I'm jumping through a hoop. Same thing with notes, just copying stuff instead of being asked really good questions and being asked to inquire and dig into questions. And again, the research in reading, it wasn't that they didn't like to tackle big projects or big ideas, but they felt like a lot of the reading or the questions that they were asked, it was either that rote type of reading, like today we're going to read section 7 and you're going to do the vocab and the questions at the end. And they're like, you're wasting our time. or that they were being asked to do research that really just had one answer that the teacher wanted them to arrive at, and I'll talk a little more and kind of show you an example of that, how that looks sometimes in school and how it could maybe look in a different way. So again, I think this goes back to the idea about, I think science can compete because they love doing hands-on stuff. And that's how we learn science, and that's how we figure things out, and that's how we collect data to say, oh yeah, that's what we thought, or no, it wasn't what we thought, and what can we do next? I think some of the reasons this really matters, there's a ton of research out there that talks about this tipping point, and depending on whose research and whose students were surveyed, sometimes it's 5th grade, 6th grade, sometimes it's 7th grade, but there is a tipping point where kids start checking out of science. In science, either is this thing that they're excited about and they want to pursue and they have interest in, or science becomes just another class in school I have to take that I'm not engaged with and I'm not connected with. Outside of school, so I do some work with the Discovery Center of Idaho, and kids quit engaging in free choice science at about this same level, a lot of kids. So using places like the Discovery Center, doing science outside of school as well, there's again this tipping point, and there's a lot of reasons or suggestions about that and why it might be, and some including things like high stakes testing and the pressures that turn science class from investigating and this kind of open exploration involving choices to we've got to cover this stuff because there's a state test or a district test, and so I've got to drill you and you need to memorize and you need to define and you need to do all that sort of stuff. And sometimes this carries through to high school, so students tend to choose quite a few STEM classes in high school, but they don't necessarily go on into it in college. And then there's also been some research talking about some problems in college where STEM majors don't actually end up in STEM careers, or they tend to kind of fall out of those fields. So I think all of this matters because when you start early and you build this foundation, I really believe, and especially with some of the things the new standards are going to help teachers think about, is that we can start mitigating this sort of stuff and helping kids love science and see science as this cool thing to do and this thing that explores and explains the world around you, and hopefully that will continue to follow them up and inform some of the choices they make, and they might make different choices when it comes to high school and college and career. So I want to throw out, and I'm not saying I agree or disagree with this statement, but I want to throw out something kind of inflammatory and provocative, and use this as just an example of what I think goes on sometimes in school. So I was just talking about research with the one answer versus a different way we can approach it. So I was thinking, all right, I'm coming to a college campus today, and I started thinking about college and large lecture halls and some of the things people complain about. So I decided I would throw a statement out there. So if we were going to learn about learning, sometimes you get a situation like this, where a teacher comes in and tells you what to think. And the teacher says, well, lecturing is ineffective, it should be discontinued. Here's some evidence, I found this thing, wherever its source might be, and that's that. And I think a lot of ways in school kids feel like that. They feel like they're trying to be led by a teacher to a specific answer. And the answer already exists, and there's no room for them to figure out something new, to inquire, to contribute. So I think this happens a fair amount. And I think it's, again, presented as a black and white. There's no other option. And it might just be like, hey, photosynthesis is this thing, here's how it works, and then that's the end of the story about photosynthesis. Like, it's that, it's done. So if we take that same thing, I think how we frame things makes a huge difference, because that's certainly not an absolutely true statement, and that's not a statement on the previous slide that doesn't have debatable areas. So if we throw a really good question out there that people are legitimately thinking about, we could say something like, what could effective teaching and learning look like in these large classes? And we could provide students with resources or help them find their own resources and help them collect data and help them make arguments and say, well, here is the potential solution or answer. And I think that's really what we're getting at, or what we should be getting at in science, is that it is an ever-changing field. There are some things that have been around a while and will probably be around for a while, like gravity. But there are a lot of things like, what do you do with gravity? Like, how can gravity help us solve problems or think about challenges in our world? Or, again, photosynthesis. Okay, there's kind of some rules on how photosynthesis works, but this week I showed students something about a researcher making an artificial leaf. So this little silicone and metal thing that takes in sunlight energy and uses water and breaks bonds and makes energy, and he's like, this thing is affordable, it's cheap, it's renewable, it's self-healing, and this could solve a lot of energy problems. So photosynthesis is this thing that's concrete on this level, but what you do with that and how that can be used in service of the world. So again, it's instead of giving them this, it's helping them form the knowledge and then giving them the question and giving them the strategies and tools so they can go out and form their own answers and find those new solutions. And Zoe mentioned about that bigger goal of being problem solvers and critical thinkers. And we use content to do that, and we use scientific processes to do that, but ultimately we want them thinking in new ways about stuff. So I've got one more thing I want to throw out there for us to do. What's your favorite thing about Sagebrush Country? And we're going to share these as a whole group. So I'll give you a couple minutes to think about it. So your experiences, and they might be limited, they might be vast, but what's something you appreciate about this part of the world in Sagebrush Country? And that second question, how did it become your favorite thing? Like, why is it a thing that maybe came to your mind? And maybe it takes you a minute or two to think about it, or maybe it just popped in your mind. So think about it, and we'll go around in just a minute and see what this made you think. I think we'll go ahead and start chatting. How about, are you willing to start?
Sure.
And we'll just kind of snake our way around the room quick and see some of the things that you guys, so just share what it is and then just real quick, like, why do you like it? Like, how did that happen?
As a kid, we always went around Fort Wayne with a family, and just seeing the diversity and the different areas going through it, and the family, it's just something we did together, which I thought was really, really cool as a kid. And that's, I haven't been here for a while since then, so that's been the experience with it.
Okay, great.
I moved here in 2005 from Seattle. We were deciding between Idaho and Montana. Drove in sight unseen in January to Mountain Home. Burst into tears as we were driving between Boise and Mountain Home. But now it's the longest place I've lived anywhere, and it's like our own version of like big sky country, and it's beautiful and very, very peaceful when you're out there.
I grew up in Ohio, so it's very alien to the world in which I explored as a kid. But I was always enchanted with the West, and I took lots of trips when I was in college, and then eventually moved out here. And I love walking across the open country. I love the dry air. Back east, you can't see more than 2-3 miles because there's so much humidity. Out here, you can see 50 miles easy through the day, especially up in the mountains. I love the rugged topography. I love the smell of the sagebrush. When you put it in your fingers and smell it. I love the wildflowers. I love hearing the birds. Just their different songs as you walk out across the prairie. My wife hates the desert, but I love it.
Thanks.
For me, it's the smell of the sagebrush in the summertime. It's a memory that I didn't know was so, forceful and until I moved back here after growing up and spending time in Seattle. Many years in Seattle, and I came back in this last summer. It's like, oh yeah, this is summer. This is smell of sagebrush, warm sagebrush. I'm from Idaho Falls, and so a lot of people who move to Boise from Idaho Falls will talk about how the drive home is super ugly because it's flat. And I always remember defending it a little bit and being like, I don't think it's as ugly as everybody keeps saying it is. Like, I like that it's open and that you can see and that it's, I agree that the desert has its own kind of like enchantment to it. And so I always think about people telling me how ugly that 4-hour drive is and me being like, you guys are crazy.
My favorite thing are the different interactions that happen between the animals and the plants and the soil and just the habitat itself. I moved here from Michigan in '04, so I understand about the Midwest, and it's completely different. When I first moved here, I thought it was such a desolate, dry, empty space, but a couple years into my biology degree, I realized that there's so much going on, and that is amazing to me that it's like a whole new world was opened up.
I have a really similar experience with all of you. I grew up in Colorado, camping in Rocky Mountain National Park my whole life, and so anything without evergreens was ugly. And so yeah, the drive from Colorado to here, and then finally hitting, Idaho Falls or Twin Falls area, and then over, it was just boring. And I don't think I even bought in until I actually had a job and I was out there and working, and certainly my favorite thing is complexity and probably the Transformers thing. It's more than meets the eye, So yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I thought Adopt a Scientist was so great and why I love what you do in your classroom is because I don't think you can really appreciate and understand something until you actually go out and explore something. And it's really easy at the Rocky Mountain National Park because there's snow-capped mountains, but trying to convince, a teenager that the sagebrush is cool is really hard to do until you get them out there, and then they can have their own sort of memories and smells and all that. So, yes.
Yeah, I think I really like the wildlife in the sagebrush stuff. I've studied ungulates for years. The pronghorn are my dream animal, and I think I like them so much because they're just so wild and free. I love seeing them whenever we drive to Colorado to visit my friends. It's a 12-hour drive, and I can't wait to see all the pronghorn on the way because there are a whole bunch of them. And the same is true, I think, when I was a master's student a long time ago. I was in a tent at 4 a.m. waiting for the sun to come up so I could see the sage grouse. And it was a freakish snowstorm the night before, so it was like 5 inches of snow, which rarely happens. And the sun came up, and it was so bright and beautiful and really cold. And the sage grouse didn't even care. They're just like out there doing their thing. They're wild. They're happy. And it's so inspirational when I see all that activity. It makes me want to get out of my office and stop typing and go be wild and free. So that's what I like.
Sorry. You kind of back there.
Yeah, sorry. I grew up on a ranch in back California, and moving here, it was actually really funny because I grew up reading like McMurdy, who wrote Lonesome Gentleman. Yeah, so it's like what do you call it? The Great Green Ocean is what he describes it as. And being 8 miles from the beach was really funny because we had like ranch expanse and then ocean expanse, and you see it and you don't see a lot until you actually look under the surface. Like you just see the sagebrush and you just see desert, but then you look at like the little how much there is, like different species that aren't there. It's not like a big tree. You can't see. You have to really look. And I think that's what really, interested me in the sagebrush. You can't just take it at like the face value. You have to be searching for something, and which makes it more important, I think. And also things are a lot hardier there. Like things that survive there survive for a reason. And yeah, that's always interesting to me.
That was the part that I love is I grew up in Utah where we had at the base of kind of the Rocky Mountains out in the out where nobody was, like horses and sagebrush, but we also had the high country. And I always thought of the sagebrush as just more tough. Like the rest of the country seemed pampered. and like it needed
I like
water
that.
and stuff like
Water.
that. You know, like, and the sagebrush, it just like, no. Yeah, survivors.
For me, it's home, and it's always been home. I grew up in Southern California in the Mojave Desert, so I was surrounded by sage. And it's just beautiful. It always has been. I love the diversity. There's so much life. And I love the fact that it's a harsh climate. I mean, there are harsher ones, but it's still, compared to mountains or the tropics, it's kind of harsh. And the delicateness of life that can survive, like your little alliums there, they can survive in this environment, and they're beautiful. And if you've never seen a Joshua in bloom, you need to. Joshua trees.
Mountain biking and trail running, I think are my favorite things with the sagebrush area. I grew up going out in the foothills out my back door and being able to go hop on a mountain bike, and that was my freedom growing up. And that was always our like conflict resolution in my family. Is like anytime we had an argument, it's like, okay, we're going on a family run, let's go. And we'd go out and just have to like talk it out on the run, and it's a good way to deal with problems, I think. But yeah, just the freedom and clarity of mind that I think those outdoor activities and outdoor recreation give me, especially in this climate, just because those trails are so prolific in this area, and I think we're really lucky to have such protected open spaces. I guess they're not that protected really because we keep seeing them diminishing with all this development in the foothills, but I really, really love the foothills.
Well, it's hard for me to narrow it down, but I think the smell of sagebrush, and specifically mountain big sagebrush, and just that sweet, almost minty perfume. And every time I smell that, there's always a flood of memories associated with that. And being a kid, and being in eastern Idaho, I had an aunt and uncle that sheep ranched over there up on the Modoc on the Continental Divide, and just being up there and bouncing in my uncle's truck up to the sheep camp, and giant Mormon crickets the size of my thumb, and just running around, and all the cool things we saw, and throwing rocks over cliffs, and camping in the summer. And what I really appreciate about what just happened is, well, let me ask you quick, how many of you, when you heard someone else say something, you had a connection with that? You were thinking like, oh, and like literally with everything everyone shared, I'm thinking a connection like, oh, I run so much in the foothills, and I love it, and I love when the lupins are going in the spring, and like there's different flocks depending on what elevation you're at, and it's like there's certainly a lot of connections, but all of these things you guys shared were born out of these significant experiences. Like you'd spent time out there where you had made some sort of connection, or you had grown up in it, or you had had this new part of your world integrated in your life and seen all these possibilities. And so I think that's really what learning is about. It's about creating these significant experiences that stick with people, where people are doing some real stuff. And as we think about that in a classroom setting, these new standards that I mentioned, I think help teachers see that by triangulating the knowledge, the content stuff with the performance expectations, asking kids to do stuff, along with helping kids see the big concepts that drive science and drive our world, like patterns and system and energy and things like that. Something also that certainly IdahoWatch and this type of work does, and Zoe talked a lot about it and showed a lot of examples, is it apprentices students in the real work of science. You're not doing novelty, but you are figuring things out in the classroom so you can go out in the real world with real scientists in a real place of work and say, that's how this stuff is used. And cool, we're collecting real data and we're trying to figure out what that data means. And these researchers are trying to figure out what this data can tell them. And it goes back to, I've mentioned a few times, this idea of doing science. And I think doing science is always easier when you tap into the world around you. So for ecology, earlier in my career, when I taught ecology, it was pick an ecosystem, do some research. And not that the tropical rainforest isn't important, or not that the Sahara Desert isn't important, or marine environments, but students can't touch and feel and experience those things as they're learning about it. And when I talk to students, they don't know a whole lot about their backyard. They know more about the mountains that are snow-capped and where they go camping, but this vast area that connects, most of the West, they don't know a whole lot about it and how it works and why it's valuable. And again, it's that 80 mile an hour on the way to a soccer tournament in Portland or Salt Lake, and they'll talk about that. And they're like, oh yeah, I've just seen that out the window of the car, but we don't really get out there. And so I just want to share a few examples of some of the things I think are significant learning experiences that I've tapped into with students in the classroom over the last few years, and the questions that kind of drive our work. So why does soil matter? Most 7th graders have never thought about soil. It's dirt, they tell you. So we talk about what's dirt versus soil, and why does it matter, and is it all the same, and what does it mean if it's different? And so we can do all sorts of cool stuff with soil to figure it out and see that, it doesn't all work the same, and it supports life in different ways. And then we went out so I brought a whole bunch of soil in during the winter, and we did all this stuff with soil. And then we went out in the field and we took plugs of soil and we looked at differences between the soil, and we tested it with some methods that we had used earlier in the year. One thing I did, I went out to my parents. They live on a bunch of sagebrush, and they have basin big sagebrush, which is like the big gnarly stuff. And so some pretty haggard and some dead shrubs, I went and just hacked them. And Roger Rosentretter from the BLM, I learned that trick from him about you wrap the tape around it so it doesn't splinter all crazy when you try to cut it up. But we said, hey, is the size a reliable indicator of age? So I cut trunks and all sorts of other stems off of shrubs, and we said, okay, let's do some measurements and see, is that something you could rely on? Is that data that's useful or meaningful? And so they took measurements and they counted growth rings, and they tried to see, is there a correlation between that or not? So how can we look at a shrub and learn some stuff about it? We did some arguments. This is one from not last spring, but the spring before, when Fish and Game was going to set out a whole bunch of poisoned eggs to kill ravens to help the grouse. And so we got into this question of like whose life matters or who gets to make the decisions. And I didn't at all suggest what the answer was. I'm like, this is a real thing I hear people are debating right now. So on one hand, ravens are everywhere and their populations are not an issue, but they're a native species and they're cool and they're super intelligent. And I kind of baited them a little bit. We watched some videos about ravens from YouTube and all the really smart things you can train them to do. And then we talked about the grouse and watched some stuff about the grouse and the perils of the grouse. And I'm like, so what would you guys do? You guys are the decision makers. Do we poison or not poison ravens with chicken eggs to help the grouse? And they got pretty fired up because no one was suggesting an answer. I gave them resources and I said, what would you do about this? Did you, question?
No, I was just stretching.
Okay. We created pocket guides. So I can't remember what organization makes it, but there's this pocket guide to sagebrush birds, and we had that. We were using that, and that was our mentor text. And we're like, people make pocket guides. Pocket guides are a way. No one wants to carry a giant book into the field. A pocket guide can go in a pocket, hence the name pocket guide, and it can be cleverly organized and have all sorts of great information. And so they picked things, and we had certainly categories that they had to include from, so they were including a wide range of plants and animals. But they got to create pocket guides and make research and put these little booklets together about things that were interesting to them in the sagebrush steppe. This one was fun. We talked about differences and adaptations, and it was the Peregrine Fund has this poster. And this poster I chopped in half and put it side by side. But the poster format starts out with the species saying its name, yes indeed, and then it talks about some things that are unique, and then it says, I am so awesome. And it happened to be a turkey vulture, so it's like, I am a turkey vulture, and it's like, I poop on my feet to cool myself off. I projectile vomit. And so the kids are like, oh, that's gross, that's so weird. And then we talked about this is a very serious organization that sells these posters, and someone created this poster and used this as a vehicle to share some information. And you are all reading the poster and talking about and conversing about it, so clearly that works. And so the front side of their posters were very concise, but on the back side, they wrote more detail, like in paragraph length, about what does it mean that this animal's an herbivore, like what does it eat, where does it live, other things about its life expectancy. So they did some real research, and so we played around with the idea that we can present information in different ways to different audiences. We can write paragraph form stuff, and then we can also make these really clever posters that make us laugh. And we covered the whole hallway outside of our door with these posters, and there were all sorts of kids, especially the hapless sixth graders, that would wander up through our hall for some elective course and be like, what are these weird posters? And people would stop and read them. And so we had real audiences for our work. And we try to do that a lot too. Kids crave real audiences when they have the support to make something and feel confident in what they made. They want other people to see it and they want to share it. And so it's fun to put that stuff up in the hall and see how many kids stop and see how many kids say, hey, look at my poster. No one says, check out my worksheet. Or check out the vocabulary assignment I did for section 6 in the book. But kids say, hey, look at my animation I made of mitosis using stop motion app on my phone. Or look at my poster, or we have these little clip-on lenses that go on cell phones that, alarm that goes off daily, that silence, that will turn your cell phone into basically a low power microscope. And they're like, look at this picture I took of those cells we were looking at. So it's trying to tap into, again, those things that instead of being competition, it can be a resource. And tying into those things that, like, I made this, it's all about me, this is super cool, look at my work, and they're teaching each other. And then of course the field trip, and Zoe talked a lot about the field trip, but that was the crux of this all, is that we did a lot of stuff in the classroom. We said, now let's go out and see it alive in the field with real scientists in a real place of work and watch this happen. And I'll just kind of cruise through. This is Noah setting a trap. They loved setting the traps. There's a squirrel in the trap and freaking out. Yes, 2015 was the International Year of Soil, so the Soil Society of America sent out a bunch of stuff, including these stickers. So we had kids posing with the I Heart Soil stickers.
Is it Chris?
Yeah, Chris, and the concealment work and the stuffed animals. Twice! I think this is the same picture.
Yeah! So famous.
That's right. And kids just doing lots of real science out in the field.
They ate tons of sagebrush too.
Awesome. Don't tell me when it's sponsored.
But then even on the way out and on the way back in their journals, attempting to answer these questions and these things that they were, that they went out into the field with their own research questions, in part with the other things that they were going to be asked to check out and do and try. And so kids, on the way out there first thing in the morning, some of them in their journals, and then on the way home, more of them, and certainly back in the classroom. There's Jen with a few students, and Zoe again. I think that's when you pit tag the squirrel.
Oh yeah.
On day 2, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
They don't have their phones.
This is my Jesus on the Hill picture.
Yes, the statue above is in Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
Zoe.
That is your final slide for your kids, and be like, I
I'm
did it.
done.
No, it's like the mic drop, thing. You should totally use that. So, I just want you to think about one last thing real quick. And it doesn't matter if you're in the social sciences or the natural sciences or whatever type of scientist, because we're all scientists. And everything we do is about inquiring into and figuring out. But I just want you to think about that real quick. So when did you decide that you wanted to go into science or learn more about science or be involved in science? And it might be like, why did you decide to take this course? This thing popped up and was a choice. So take a moment and just jot down a few thoughts. And I think this time around, just for the sake of time, just turn and chat with someone around you and share what you wrote when you're ready to share.
It's so embarrassing.
Why?
Steve Irwin.
Oh, yeah. No, I have a friend who's a herpetologist who has like tattoos of it, and he does the what's it called? I forget what it's called all of a sudden, but he's been to my son's preschool. And
Oh yeah.
he was usually at the kids fair with all his Tyler. Nice to meet you.
Like there's another guy who goes on like he went to
That's
Ida
Tyler's interest. Do you heard of that? Yeah.
Why does why does it do that?
Well, I don't know. Mine's kind of embarrassing too. So like when I was little, like my goal was to be a photographer for National Geographic.
Cool.
But so like the first time in college and like through high school, like I was always like so into art. But then like it was like later in life, like after I had my son, like I just quit my job and was like, I think I should just work with animals or something. My husband was so mad at me that I just quit my job, but I went and worked at a kennel and then I went and worked at the vet clinic.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until like after all of this that I was like, I feel wrong, like I'm in the wrong spot. And then after he was born, like I went back to work for a little bit and I laid a bunch of people off. And so I was like, well, I might as well go back to school, but like this time I'm gonna shoot bigger. And I was like, turned like my whole life around just to, instead of going down the art path, like go down the science path. And then I'm like, oh, I fit in here. Like, I like it.
So we'll come back together real quick. I hate to cut you off
I have
because
that like aha moment every day.
what I appreciate right now, just eavesdropping, is I heard excitement and joy in stories and connections and specific experiences and things inside of school and outside of school. And so just kind of to close things up, that spark needs to happen for kids. So all of you had that spark or that thing or that collection of things. And so I think that's what science education is all about. Some of our students in the K-12 setting will become the next generation of scientists and policymakers and land managers. And the ones that don't, and it's not to say that every kid needs to become a scientist or is going to become a scientist, because that's not the case, but those students are going to be residents of the West, or they're going to be residents of whatever natural place they live in. And so to help them understand what's in the world around them and how does it work and why does it matter, and how that can lead them to make decisions in their life about who they buy from, who they vote for, what they support, what they don't support. So again, helping them to think critically about the world around them and to be able to see places with a different perspective and a perspective for the natural world. And yeah, it's all this stuff that I think is the bigger meaning of school, aside from just this is photosynthesis and how it works. This is how to think and how to learn and how to problem solve and how to think about your future. So I'm going to plug the Instagram one more time. If you're on Instagram, you should follow Sagebrush Step, or you should at least like peek in on it and see what's going on there. And there's my email if anyone wants to chat or has any questions. And I'm really excited to work together and to get kids out in the field and doing science again, because it changes them. It is an experience that they will remember, whether it's rattlesnakes or walking over the hill and pooping outside, as the case may be. Where's the bathroom? See that blue bin? There's toilet paper in it. See that hill there? When you come back, no one should see any evidence that you were there. And you're like, really? Yeah, haven't you ever been camping? So anyways, but to see animals and interact with animals and plants and scientists and to change their perspectives and their perceptions of who is a scientist, and to get them to see that, hey, I'm a scientist. I'm a 7th grader. I'm a scientist. Like, I'm figuring stuff out. That's what science is all about. So, thanks.
Do we have any questions? Micah?
Yeah, I have some. About the Instagram thing, do you
Sure.
think that there's like a possibility of like overstimulating kids and like providing like too many areas to look for like assignments or information?
So it is completely optional. It is never like assignment based or you have to go there because yeah, you don't want to you don't want to have too much of that stuff. And it's about accessibility too. So anything that is an assigned thing has got to be accessible to all students, and not all students can use or have mobile technology. So it is purely an extension at this point. So it's like, hey, if you're on this, you should follow it, and you'll see some cool pictures, and maybe you'll learn something, and maybe you'll see a picture from class. So yeah, that's definitely an issue for students and for families, is to have access to stuff. So right now it's just kind of an extra enrichment or bonus type thing.
Okay. I had another question. So my son, he's in 2nd grade, and the other day, people from, I don't know how he was trying to explain it, but he like mixed up people from the IBO and the Peregrine Fund. But he was so excited because there were people that he knows because of the Wildlife Society, or like people that I've worked with and gone to school with. But he was so engaged, and I know that he has another classmate, and her dad works at BSU too in the biology department, I think, and they were so excited and drawn into science. And so I was wondering, like, how early should we start engaging them? Like something like this, he would get so much out of it. And like coming from me, he kind of like just blocks me out. I'm like, hey, let's go hiking. You want to do some field work with me? He's like, no, I don't. But if somebody else were to offer that to him, he would be interested.
There are iterations of this. It's never too early, like flipping over rocks and finding bugs, or picking flowers, or I think kids in the earlier, that's where kids need caught, is not when they start drifting out of it in 5th, 6th, or 7th grade, which some do, but every kid is naturally curious as a young learner, and then we beat it out of them. And there's a lot of good quotes that people say about that. The school system basically beats all that out of you, because then you now are to conform and do this and that and exactly this way, and 12-point font and black ink, or whatever, all these things. So I would say it's never too early to get kids curious, and to get them asking questions, or to ask them questions. What do you think that is? Or why do you think that works that way? Or how did that get there? And then just getting them to be curious.
So I'm going to jump in really quick here on that. So I used to work at the Deer Flat National Wildlife Refuge as an environmental educator for 2 years, and that's all we did is visited schools with kids under 5th grade, because that was sort of our target audience. And what's really nice about Treasure Valley is there are probably 15 different wildlife-based agencies that do school outreach, and mostly we did field trips. So we had buses and buses of kids coming to see us, and we take out in the sagebrush steppe, explore things. I know the Foothills Learning Center does that, the Nature Center does that, IBO. So this area is really great because there are tons of organizations that do that. They always need people to help them educate the students that come there, because they have more need and demand than they do people that can work there and educate. So there are a lot of programs. There used to be a program at Boise State where they would send graduate students to these organizations to help them with their programming, but I know they take volunteers all the time. So that's something that if you guys are more interested in, we can talk about as a class incorporating, is working with some of those sort of teaching centers to see what we can do. But that's just something to throw out there too. So if you want your students or your own kids to be more involved in that, you can go to their teacher and say, hey, have you heard of this wildlife refuge or this place that does school field trips? Because most of them are free. The ones that are associated with any sort of public agency or state agency, they're all free. So.
And I'm doing some stuff right now with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and BLM, and same thing. They're trying to develop stuff for teachers, and we want teachers to come learn this cool stuff and help kids learn this stuff. So tons of opportunities.
And from these agencies or organizations' standpoint, part of their mission statement is always outreach and education. Outreach. Every single agency, every single organization, regardless, their mission statement ends with education and public outreach. So there's always that need. And I would say, at least for the IdahoWatch or Adopt Scientists, the only reason why it's middle school, high school is because those are the 2 teachers that we have so far. But yeah, being able to kind of craft that for a younger audience would be amazing.
And exciting even to see the National Science Foundation, their grants, again, here's this outreach, you're writing a grant, outreach. What are you going to do to help others see the value of this science? Did you have a question? Or?
Yeah, I'm considering a career as a high school teacher. Not necessarily in science, I would be doing history. But one thing that is concerning to me is I've heard all these horror stories about the administration getting in the way of what you want to teach. I mean, as a teacher, is that a problem? You hear all these stories about the Leave No Child Behind, or all these teaching for the tests, and parents always complaining about that kind of. I mean, is it
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Is it worth the headache?
I would say absolutely. Every school, every district has a different culture and a different set of constraints and different demands. But I think something as a teacher, and it takes a while to develop as a teacher, but when you can speak from the authority of your practice, and you can say, this is how I'm meeting standards and helping kids learn, and these are practices that are best practices that are research based, typically those questions drop away. And if people can see your kids, like any administrator, unless something's just really wrong, wants to see kids engaged in learning. So if you can show, I've got kids engaged in learning, you don't have behavioral problems out of my class, you don't have these issues, like kids are doing real stuff, people get behind that. But that being said, it's literally like any profession. There are challenges, there are opportunities, but there's and I was in the corporate world for like 4 or 5 years before I went into teaching, and I wouldn't go back for anything. It's crazy, it's fun, it's different every day, it's different every class period. I have classes of 40, or not 40, but like 35 that feel like a class of 20, and I have this 7th period class of 20 kids that feels like it's a class of 50. So I mean, even every hour throughout the day is different, and I think it's totally worth it. And I'd be happy to talk more about just stuff about teaching in general and the job and opportunities and things like that. Yeah.
So I have a question because basically about like doing science, it's asking questions and questioning questions and getting to wrong, like not wrong answers, but oh, that didn't work, oh, this didn't work. The only problem is like with school, it's like this is the right answer because this is like there's points associated. You need points per grade to show what you're learning.
Mm-hmm.
How, I don't know, do you have like an example of how you're, as far as a teaching standpoint, like how is that gradable as that? Because
Sure.
you have to like show, it's kind of hard to show grades when you're wanting to show results as far as them learning, like as far as a report card or progress, something like that. I'm just like curious because doing science is, it's a lot of trial and error, and which is really great, but I just don't like know how.
Yeah, students, my class, students have a lot of choice and flexibility in how they learn, but we have any given unit, any given project. Here's the thing that matters, and it might be, I keep using photosynthesis because we finished that recently, but it might be photosynthesis. And in part of your project, you're modeling and explaining working for the photosynthesis, and you do need to have the correct reactants and the correct products, and you do need to be able to explain accurately how it works. Now, you're going to model it in different ways, and you're going to do creative things with it. But like the ecology stuff, like the pocketbooks, part of that was a food web, and it's like you have to have these different trophic levels in your food web, and you have to have native animals, and you have to explain these concepts for your readers. So it's a balance between giving them choice and for example, these different animals or plants they want to look at, but at the same time, like what categories of plants and animals are out there that are important, and you need to have a mix of those, and you need to understand why they're different. So and in a lot of ways, I think when we go through a progression of learning, we start with the basics. We learn what is the concept, why does it matter, how does it work. We get in the lab, we prove it. And then once we've done that stuff, we can say, now let's try it in a way people use it in the real world, and then let's kind of open things up. So it is a balance of both of those things.
A lot of people, and it's just students, they want to arrive at a question and answer.
You got to break them a little bit.
Yeah, it's really hard for them to go on there.
I tried for 5 seconds. What's the answer? Where do you want me to put here?
Exactly.
I don't know.
Like when you want
I don't
to
know.
say, it's, where am I trying to go? Yeah.
I answer a lot of their questions with questions. Now, I'm, of course, as helpful and supportive as I possibly can be, but a lot of it's helping them to think, because in some ways you are untraining them.
Right.
Like how to really learn and not play the game of school, and now how not to just jump through a hoop. And I remember a couple years ago, we had a bunch of the gifted and talented kids that year in my hallway, and they were some of the kids that got so frustrated by this type of learning because they basically had just ridden through school on the fact that I have photographic memory. You give me a study guide the night before the test, I can memorize that sucker and I can circle the right thing and fill in the right blank. And they're like, effort. I have to explain my thinking, and but after they got over that, then they were really pretty, intelligent, talented kids that could creatively solve solutions. But it's just a good example of how there's this game of school that works one way, and then I believe learning works another way, and they're not completely compatible. And there's a lot of wonderful teachers and wonderful schools and classrooms doing true learning. And there are also classrooms and schools where they are playing the game of school, and they are playing, let's get the test scores that are not going to get us in trouble, and that's, going back to your question about is it worth it. There are certainly schools like that where you have those pressures that maybe aren't found in other schools or districts where these scores matter and kids need to achieve. That being said, I think there's ways you can kind of serve both of those things. It's more complex, it's more difficult, it's more challenging, but yeah.
How transparent with your students are you about what you see, and I would agree with you, as the failures of education in those ways, in the ways that it really stifles your creative and critical thinking skills and your ability to connect cross-curricular ideas and such things? Because so how transparent are you is the first question. And secondly, I feel like in junior high, a lot of kids start to get that jaded, F school, it's not fun, I'm not learning anything. They start to see through that. They start to see that it's a game. They start to see that what's the point? And how do you combat that jaded attitude? And do you continue to encourage them to go through education? And how do you do that, I guess?
You get all subversive on them. You get on their side and you're like, dude, we're not playing this stupid game of school. We're really going to learn. And so I would say I'm transparent. I don't want to say almost to a fault, but to a point where I have to watch myself so that kids aren't watching in another class and saying, you're giving us a multiple choice test. That's stupid. No one learns from a multiple choice test. All it shows is the alignment with your study guide and whether anyone crammed or so. I restrain myself, but kids appreciate that. Middle schoolers have wonderful BS detectors, and they know when a teacher has mailed it in and is just giving them something to fill the time. Or they know, teacher's out, has a sub, I Xerox some worksheets at the last minute, do those, and it doesn't matter. And if I'm gone, I'm gone. I'm going to be gone tomorrow, guys. This is the stuff we're working on. You're going to work on it. You don't need me here. You guys have each other's resources. You have resources. Continue your work, and we'll regroup the next day. But I'm really transparent with them because they appreciate that. And they don't want their time wasted. And they know when teachers are wasting their times for the most part. And when you talk to them about, hey, we're doing real stuff, and this is what real people do in the real world, and this is why this stuff matters, and they appreciate that, and they buy into that, and then they are more willing to take risks and to think hard and to try and do things and to try to figure out problems even though it might be tough. And that's not to say all students. I mean, you always have those kids that it doesn't matter, you could come in and do I don't know what, and they would still look at you because that's just, who they are. But for the most part, most kids buy into that and appreciate that authenticity and honesty and those transparent conversations. And I try to just always up front to lay them out and say, I'm not wasting your guys' time. I'd never waste your time. I'm asking you to learn and to do true learning. And it's going to be tough. And you're going to wrestle with things because if you can do it automatically, you're not learning, you already know it. And learning is productive struggle. So yeah, does that kind of get it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, okay. My eyes are going, I've been staring at that too long. So it doesn't seem like the Great Basin would be a really politically thorny issue, especially for middle school kids, but it is. I mean, you have all these conflicting wants and needs on land that is managed by the government, which is its own issue. And when you're directing talks like this, like Poisoning Ravens, do students ask for your questions or ask your opinions on this? How honest are you with them? And do you prepare for backlash from parents? Does that enter into how you teach? Okay, we're talking about this. This should be a fun science thing that has a lot of political ramifications. What are they going home and saying to their parents, and how does that come full circle?
Yeah, well, we tend to not address things, and I'll talk about that Raven example real quick in just a minute, but the things we do tend to not be politicized in a way. It's focused on the science and focused on, species or interactions or, whatever the ecology curriculum is. So it doesn't get into that. With the Raven thing, I remember kids asking me, I said, I don't know, guys. I answer things a lot like that. Well, I don't know. Well, on one hand, I can see why people would say this, and on the other hand, I can see why people would say that, and I'm not sure. I have to think about it some more. And so I answer a lot of questions like that. If it's something pretty controversial, but we tend to avoid those things. And I've never had an issue in terms of like a parent or anything like that, because we try to address in a way that, again, I'm not putting my value out there. I'm asking them to look at a real thing and to collect some evidence and to make an argument based on the evidence and what they see as the stronger, more compelling of the evidence. So, but there is always that potential if you get into controversial issues. And I think I see that more here and there with English language arts teachers and certain novels they're teaching and certain themes, that might come up in literature. And those themes sometimes culturally or religiously conflict with individual beliefs and tend to have more of those issues. But yeah, I just never had it come up. But yeah, I usually don't tell them a whole lot about what I think. I kind of put it back out there as that's something to consider, So I want you guys to tell me what you think and you guys to think about it. You don't need to know what I think about it. So.
So when Zoe was talking, she mentioned that when you ask students, like, what do you think of a scientist, they'll mention, like, Bill Nye.
Mm-hmm.
And with the resurgence in popularity of Bill Nye or, like, Neil deGrasse Tyson and kind of the popularity of the science and, like, nerd trope, I was wondering if you've seen that at all change the perception of, like, interest in science, or if students are less shy about getting involved in science because they're not afraid of, like, that stereotype, or if that hasn't really impacted it because I don't know. But
yeah, I can't say as though I've noticed overtly with this age group. Certainly some kids will talk about some of those things and things going on in science because that's just kind of their inclination, but I can't say as though I've really noticed that. I think what gets at or helps kids get at more that, like, this science is cool and I can geek out about this stuff, is that if you, at the beginning of the year, work really carefully to set up a classroom environment where kids are willing to take risks and they see that risks are okay and risks are how you learn and that there's this mutual respect and that we'll appreciate lots of different ideas, then I think kids get a little more comfortable. And it takes a while and some groups are more comfortable with others and then they'll geek out and they'll get excited about stuff. But yeah, I can't say as though I've noticed that with 7th graders really, whether that stuff is translated into a general, aside from, it seems like in each class grade there's a handful of those kids that are kind of like in the science, and all their other teachers along the way said, oh yeah, they've always been into science. So it's hard to say.
All right, well, let's give our speakers one round of applause. I have to say, after listening to both of them, I'm really inspired for a lot of projects that we can do. So I know it seems sort of daunting to sort of put together an activity and go out of the sage rush with 175 kids, but Micah and Zoe, the other teacher we're working with, and I am here to help you, so we're going to be able to do it together. And I think the students are going to learn a lot. I think we'll learn a lot, and we'll do it together. So I think that'll be really fun. I just wanted to mention that for next week, first of all, check to see if the reflection questions are online. A lot of them are open-ended questions like we talked about today, so it should be a time where you can sort of think and reflect on what we learned in class, the skills that you might bring to class, things that you might be thinking about for an IdahoWatch project, so take some time when you go through those. But if they're not there, because I don't know how to use Blackboard like I think I do, email me and let me know. And then, what else was I going to say? Next week, on Tuesday, I'll lead the discussion so you guys can sort of see how that goes, but do take a chance to read those papers. And like I said, just read.
That's good, because Eric, who has done this before, got done. He got done